Good morning, everyone, and welcome to TBR's webcast, Connecting Services to Make Hybrid the New Cloud Foundation, recapping customer adoption of hybrid cloud as reported in our Hybrid Cloud Customer Report, which is part of our cloud customer portfolio. My name is Allison Crawford, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. In the next 45 minutes, Senior Analyst Alan Kranz will walk you through some of the high-level findings on customer behavior, vendor perception, and opportunity we uncovered as part of this research, followed by an opportunity to ask questions about the results. Before I pass this over to Alan, there are a few logistics I'd like to cover with you. First, we'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A function or chat function. Alan will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to either Alan or myself at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find the slides as well as thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight, and I'll share all the social media links again at the end of the presentation. Now let me introduce Alan Kranz. Alan is one of our senior analysts within the TBR software and cloud practice. In addition to leading our consulting program within software, he has also been leading the analyst teams across software, hardware, and services during the launch of our newly initiated cloud program. Alan is one of our lead cloud software spokespersons, providing both analytics and strategic advice, helping vendors identify new opportunities and revenue streams. And with that, let me hand this over to Alan.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everybody, for joining. So as we get into today's presentation, I wanted to orient you all to the body of work that we have around cloud and the ways that we're segmenting the market. So starting at the bottom, today's presentation will go through the highlights from our hybrid cloud customer adoption study. We just wrapped this up at the end of last year. So we'll look at, from the customer side, the drivers for adoption, the level of adoption, and the perception of vendors that are delivering solutions around this space. We also cover the market through our benchmarks and vendor reports. These focus from a vendor perspective on the strategies, levels of investment, return, revenue that are being generated, as well as the high-level trends that cut across the different markets, those being public, private, and professional services within cloud. So really a broad portfolio. Today we'll focus on the customer, but it's all in the context of the vendor landscape and the strategies that are best aligning to the space. So here we have a little bit more depth in terms of the vendors that we're covering, the different benchmarks that we have. The research that we'll go through today is highlighted at the bottom in the middle, so the hybrid cloud study. And we've rounded that out with views into both the private cloud as well as the cloud professional services. One thing that I'll draw your attention to, these topical reports, we just completed last year the cloud security and orchestration reports. So those complement the deep dives into each segment in terms of the adoption, look at trends that really impact all of these different markets. Going forward into 2014, the first report, and you'll see some commentary around it today, is this trend between IT and line of business purchasing and the increasing need for collaboration across those two divisions within customers as things like cloud go forward, particularly with something like hybrid. You'll see a lot of indication from our research and data that those two interplays are becoming increasingly important. So we're devoting an entire topical report to that based on the 2014 research. So stay tuned, there's more to come there. Now, all of our customer studies draw from a total of 2,200 annual surveys. We're conducting interviews that provide the qualitative quotes as well throughout the year. You can see that with this year, we're really going forward with a global reach with these studies. You see some of the analysis layered in here in terms of the differences in geography, and actually it's quite applicable to hybrid, as we saw differences both in terms of the drivers for investment, the types of approaches that are being taken with hybrid. And so as a vendor providing solutions in that space, It really is a diverse global landscape that needs to be addressed. And so customers are in different spots along the maturity curve in each of those areas. So we're publishing the second half of our 2013 streams coming up very shortly. So we'll go through our first iteration of the hybrid report in today's presentation. So when we look at the hybrid market overall, it's one of those areas that, and we've seen this with all of the cloud spaces really, there's an evolution in terms of what it means to customers, what's actually delivered, and how it's actually being used. And so when we look at hybrid, early on last year, it really was a very fuzzy definition in terms of what it actually composed. And you've seen a lot of definitions evolve. Ours certainly has over that time. The one that we're using for this study, and that's the focus of the research today, is two different types of cloud for the same workload, but that they're integrated and centrally managed. So it's not cloud in a silo. It's cloud that's coordinated and orchestrated across multiple different delivery methods, but that there's that centralized management point. It's not two uncontrolled resources. They are connected and integrated together. And so as we've looked at this definition change, I think with the early adoption we've seen, customers have certainly gotten a lot more concrete in terms of what hybrid means for them. And going forward, the way that we see this changing, and we've seen it with a lot of the advanced customer adoption, is that this is the new foundation for cloud. It's not something that's standalone. It's something that is a core component of delivering the original benefits of cloud, a lot of which have kind of gotten lost along the way for customers that have gone forward with public cloud adoption, gone into private cloud. They've reached this tipping point where there's this necessary component that underlies it, and that, in fact, is hybrid. It allows them to get back to the cost benefits of cloud, the flexibility benefits of cloud, and not let all of the different tools and services they've adopted along the way get in the way of that. So in a lot of ways, it's a back-to-basics approach for customers that have gone forward with hybrid adoption so far. In terms of the opportunity, we'll go through a little bit more in depth, but we're looking at just for the integration part of that. There's a lot of additional benefits that come from hybrid, but just the opportunity in terms of delivering the tools and services that integrate those, $7 billion in 2013. So right there, it's a very real monetary opportunity already for vendors providing tools in this space. The customer landscape. What we've seen so far, and we see this changing already, is the ways that it's being delivered. A lot of custom integrations. That $7 billion is really hard-spent effort, both on the part of vendors and customers, but not a lot of standardized solutions out there that have made this transition very easy for the early adopters. And then going in for you all, for a vendor targeting this space, what's the most important thing to take away in terms of how to be successful here? And the word that I think sums it up best on our end is authenticity. This is not something where a lot of the past relationships are going to be able to carry through over into the hybrid. It's really an approach that demonstrates first an expertise around cloud, and then the tools and expertise to really integrate them together. That is the key defining purchasing criteria. So it's a difficult market for a lot of the traditional IT vendors to go in and deliver around cloud overall, but hybrid in particular. And that's given rise to a number of smaller pure plays that have started to capitalize on areas of this going forward. So all in, kind of the summary is we do see hybrid as being the new foundation for cloud, something that will be increasingly important, not just to monetize directly on its own, but to continue the advance of the individual cloud markets in public and private. So a couple things. As we start to look at the market size here, you can see this does not certainly stand alone. Cloud adoption really started with the public side. It continues to be dominated by public cloud services from just an overall opportunity perspective. but you've also seen the private cloud accelerate at a rate that I think has surprised us, surprised a lot of the participants and vendors in the market, just how quickly customers are adopting not just the self-built private clouds that I think most thought of under the original definition, but these, it's really a private that's delivered by another service provider. So it's been a real boon for a lot of the SIs to be able to transition some of the legacy hosting ITO businesses, maintain that hold with customers, and generate fairly significant businesses that we're covering, delivering private cloud services as a third party to end customers. So the role that we see hybrid playing is to really integrate those two, enable additional growth through public and private, because we've seen for customers this tipping point, either in terms of the complexity of workloads that they want to be delivered, where it's not a concrete fit with either public or private. They want a blending of the two. And so for a lot of those workloads, and certainly we see more applications going this route going forward, that's a big driver for why that hybrid opportunity is coming up, but it draws a lot of public and private along with it. Or secondly, for a lot of customers that have gone farther down the road with either public or more recently private cloud adoption and reached a tipping point in terms of managing a number of siloed services from different providers, some on-site, some off-site. The complexity that's arisen there has driven them to the realization that centralized management platform integration between the different cloud environments is what they need to continue to operate in an efficient way. So those are really the two tipping points. When we look at the types of integrations, you can see that public to private is the largest one. So this really kind of reinforces why hybrid is a more recent trend. We didn't see the same levels of private cloud adoption 5 years ago. Certainly it's been a more recent trend to do that, but it's driven a lot of the need for hybrid integration and centralized management that we're now seeing monetized within that $7 billion opportunity. You do see some on the fringes of private to private and public to public, but really for most of the use cases in the interviews that we've done, the public to private integration is the most distinct use case, particularly for the large enterprises that we really focus the study on. Now, getting a little bit under the overall market opportunity, the way that we arrived at these numbers, and I'll show you some of the highlights from the survey, is taking a grounds-up approach. So for all the customers that we interacted with as part of the study, we went through the holistic cloud budgeting process and all the different categories of spend that dollars were allocated to that go around cloud. So it's more than just the services themselves. You'll see we covered professional service expenditures as well. So it really is both the tools and services that are needed to deliver these. So a couple things to call out as we look at the size of hybrid cloud budgets in relation to some of the other areas. So first of all, hybrid still is the smallest area of spend on average for the customers that we spoke with. We don't really see that changing going forward. I think it'll be a layer that cuts across a lot of different services that are being consumed, but still the services are the focus. Getting the benefit from those services are the focus. Hybrid is just another way to make sure that that actually happens. Secondly, if you look at hybrid compared with public cloud, obviously on the previous slide, the public cloud expenditure overall are much larger. So this starts to get at some of the incidence rates that we saw within the different service lines that we're covering. Hybrid, much lower overall incidence rate today. So that's driving that smaller $7 billion opportunity. For public cloud, although it's not that much smaller than the hybrid investments, nearly ubiquitous adoption across the customer base that we're looking at, which drives up that opportunity. So smaller areas of spend and more adoption across the customer base. So there's a question that just came in on what the average enterprise 2013 cloud budget really means. So part of it gets back to the segment that we focused on for the report, and that's large enterprise. In the U.S., it was 1,000 customers and up. As we went overseas, we used 500 as the minimum benchmark for number of employees a customer had to participate in the study. So as part of that, we asked about overall IT budget, cloud budgeting from a total perspective, and then segmenting that into the categories that you see here. So it's really for the large enterprise customers that we focused on for our survey, the reported budgetary numbers for cloud, and then the different sub-segments that we're covering here. And so they were defined along the way and then rolled up into this aggregate view. So I mentioned that we did a global study that looked at a number of different regions. And so as we looked at, now you notice first the numbers are a little bit different than the 2 million that we saw in the prior slide. That's because for these numbers here, this is only for those customers that have adopted. So on the prior slide, not everybody had hybrid cloud, so obviously for them, their level of investment was 0, which drives that lower overall number. So when we looked within adopters, you start to see these geographic differences, which really, we believe, tell the story of the underlying economics and infrastructure that exist in these regions, as well as the levels of cloud adoption that have already taken place to date. So starting with the North American highest budgets overall, a couple things that I think drive that. There's lots of legacy cloud purchases. So public cloud, a lot of those vendors focus almost exclusively on the U.S. for a number of different reasons. But really the most fertile base to come in and provide those hybrid integration layers and be able to capitalize on that value proposition for customers that have, cloud sprawl, whatever you want to call it, a diverse base of cloud solutions that hybrid can come in and deliver benefits for. Going up into Europe. Going up into Europe, significantly different environment than in North America. More limited cloud adoption for both the infrastructure perspective as well as the overall regulatory environment, as well as all the economic issues that have been prevalent over the past couple of years in that region. Kind of combined to drive overall over expenditures. There's less complexity in terms of the cloud assets and the private cloud assets that need to be integrated. So I think you see that reflected in slightly lower levels of adoption for those, or investment for those folks that have adopted. One of the interesting regions throughout the report, we'll touch on some of the areas that stuck out in terms of the research, but in Asia Pacific, fairly high levels of investment for those customers that have adopted a hybrid environment. And so what we see there is, and we saw it with the private cloud adoption report, more private cloud adoption compared with public. If you look at it globally, APAC is a little bit more heavy on the private cloud side. Some of it is due to the level of infrastructure. The availability of public cloud services is not as prevalent in that region. And so more need to integrate private with emerging public solutions. And the way that it's being done in Asia Pacific is also different. We see a lot more emphasis on the custom integrations, which are more expensive to get set up to begin with, more labor involved in doing that, driving almost relative parity between the average investment for Asia Pacific versus the average investment for North America. Shifting a little bit from the current state to where we see going forward, I think the key thing, so this is within folks that have adopted, what's on their radar for adoption over the next 12 months and then beyond that horizon. And so I think that the critical thing is, and it makes me think of an event I attended where Steve Mills from IBM spoke, and he kind of made a joke about people who have kids that are younger, probably out in the audience, thinking they still have time to make sure they turn out the way that they want. Spend more time, manners, all the things that is difficult to instill in kids. And he said, for those of you with older children in the audience, you know the fact it's already too late. And so I think as we look at hybrid, it makes me think back to that, because the pace with which this investment has happened, private kind of surprised us. Hybrid, I think, is even more surprising in terms of both current levels of adoption, but also you see a definite peak that another 24% on top of the 20% that have already adopted. We're going to have a majority of customers, at least in the large enterprise segment, that have adopted hybrid cloud by the end of this year. And so I think for a vendor targeting this area, it's just a real call for urgency, that you may think you have time, but this is really developing more quickly than folks expected. I think the need for it is really becoming more distinct, even as those early adopters and you start to see more solutions in the market. Say to them that this is real, this is achievable, that there's real benefits in terms of the operational efficiency. So I think that's only going to heighten the pace or the urgency for enterprises to continue to move towards hybridization of their existing cloud assets throughout this year. So I've kind of gone through some of the numbers, the background, the ways that we see it developing. I wanted to take a step back and say, all right, so for all of that opportunity and activity, what's actually driving it? And the interesting thing when we looked at the perceived benefits, the ways that customers were moving to achieve those, is that a lot of the value proposition for hybrid is really bringing back those original benefits of cloud that led them on their first journeys, either in public cloud or private cloud. That it's not all that much different. They want it to continue to deliver efficiency, flexibility, reduction in total cost of ownership. Those are no different than the reasons customers adopt cloud in the first place. The one that sticks out and that is really kind of unique enabler for hybrid cloud is this increased standardization of process across workloads. So they don't want to have to be doing different things for different workloads in different cloud environments. The inefficiencies that have cropped up as a result of that type of behavior have eroded some of the original benefits of cloud. So it's really about bringing back the ability to deliver the benefits of cloud without having the complexity or the scale of the workloads get in the way of that. From a vendor strategy, I think going out and being able to message that hybrid itself is not the area that needs to be delivered. It's really hybrid as a means to unlocking the benefits of the existing cloud services and that net new incremental cloud service that's added, so that it all rolls up and brings back those operational efficiencies. I think it's a message that most customers won't be thinking about it yet, but ultimately as you see broader adoption, as customers get more experience with their initial approaches and tactics around hybrid, that's ultimately, I think, what will best resonate with customers to drive additional investment in this area. So another look at the different geographic perspectives. Overall, we saw within the 2,000 customers that we went out to as part of the study, about 22% have adopted in hybrid overall. And you notice that doesn't vary quite significantly from region to region. Really, a lot of the benefits, I think, are standard across them. The environments, the landscape that's being sold into may be different. But overall, about 20% on that leading edge have moved forward with some level of adoption. So in terms of the best approach, while the level of adoption may be pretty standard, the reasons why customers are moving towards adoption and the approach they're taking varies quite differently. So I think when we look at recommending how vendors can succeed, in the Americas, in EMEA, there's a very premeditated approach to hybrid cloud. While it may have taken them a while to get there, they had always been planning for eventually, going through this period of cloud service expansion, but then this contraction back with centralized management, more efficiencies in terms of how it's orchestrated and controlled. We're always part of the long-term landscape. It's just a matter of having the tools and the investments ready to actually be able to deliver that. In Asia Pacific, we saw a higher incidence of customers that, it's almost like a, not a rescue, but an unanticipated need for hybrid cloud. So they had gone forward with some purchases, gotten to a point where the operations were such that the inefficiencies were already there. They needed to react to them. And so what we saw was a lot of custom integration work to knit that together after the fact, rather than the roadmap that lays out the eventual plan to hybridization. So really that's the key takeaway here is, although the level of adoption is the same, the way that they're getting there and the planning that's taking place varies quite significantly. And so therefore the messaging can change pretty dramatically by geo as well in terms of what's best going to resonate. So we've looked at the overall levels of adoption. Here we start to get into some of the themes that we've touched on throughout, which are, all right, so how, what forms are these investments actually taking? How are customers achieving their hybrid integrations? And so the first thing that I'll draw your attention to are the average number of integration methods used. So we had a list that's on the left. And so we looked at, for the respondents in the survey, how many were selected? It was a multiple select. So you can see for the Asia Pacific folks on the bottom, many more, or one more on average, types of integration techniques being used to integrate their hybrid clouds. So less standardization around a single integration point, one services firm to be able to deliver that for them, a little bit more diversity in terms of the approach that they're taking. And so I think that's pretty consistent with the story throughout about being reactionary in terms of when hybrid is planned for and introduced. They are, throwing a number of different techniques at these integrations to make them work, whereas eventually we see more of a mature type consumption getting up into, if you look at EMEA and the US, 2 on average rather than 3. So going beyond just the number, the top methods that were utilized, the only one where the pre-built cloud vendor integrations was used was in the US. And so although the custom is still prevalent almost throughout, we see that as the leading edge for where these integrations are going, that there'll be more pre-built, standardized, packaged rather than labor-dependent, much more of an ad hoc approach that, in a lot of ways, we think inflated some of the budgetary numbers for the Asia-Pacific adopters. So when we look at the types of workloads that were actually migrated to hybrid cloud, there's very strong similarities between this view and the views that we saw early on with private cloud adoption. And that is, if you look at on the left some of the most highly adopted workloads in 2013 in the dark bar, fairly horizontal in their orientation. Storage, test and dev, compute, these are things that are really capacity focused, that cut across a number of different, in the end, whether it's applications or database, different services that are ultimately delivered. So it's really more of a play to connect. A lot of the use cases we've seen are to connect a public cloud resource to a private cloud, to provide that bursting capability, to meet peak loads. That's really the best defined use case that we've seen for hybrid cloud. So there's a lot of cost efficiencies and operational efficiencies involved with being able to do that in an automated way. But the shift that we see, and this was really mirrored on the private cloud as well, if you look at where the biggest increases in adoption are going to lie for 2014, it's way over on the right in those workloads that are a lot more vertical in their orientation, a lot more application specific, less growth to be had on the horizontal capacity, more on discrete specific workloads that directly address, in a lot of cases, the business needs within those customers. And so we talked a little bit about our study that's coming out on IT versus line of business purchasing. So this is another reflection where a lot of the early purchases in hybrid have been led by IT. We see more of a transition to LOB involvement in terms of the flexibility, the cost savings, being able to translate that back into the business outcomes through the line of business is that next step in the evolution of this market. We saw it take place in private cloud where a lot more input, influence back and forth between those two parties. We expect to see the same thing in hybrid, and you can see it reflected in the types of workloads that are highlighted for moving to hybrid going forward. Those are things that are going to require involvement from both sides of the house. And so, again, we see cloud overall as really driving a lot of that convergence of those two parties in terms of how IT purchases are actually take place. And so hybrid is the next chapter of that story, if you will, in terms of bringing those two closer together and really moving line of business applications onto these cloud and now hybrid cloud delivery methods. So the last theme that we're going to touch on today looks at, so we've looked at the size of the market, customer perspective, drivers, for vendors out there, what do they need to be thinking about? What's the perception from customers in terms of how they're selecting the vendors to deliver hybrid cloud services and deliver those integrations that cut across different cloud services? So I think one of the most frightening prospects for traditional IT vendors is that we see an incredible increased willingness to break from both the IT solutions of the past as well as the vendors that they've developed relationships with, and in some ways take a risk on competitors that weren't even in the IT space before. It really opens up the competitive landscape to a number of different providers. Amazon is one. There's a whole number of startup communities that are participating in the space. And so with that, there's this increased need to, if you look at what drives customer decision-making and behavior, the cloud knowledge and complete line of business cloud capabilities. So that far outweighs any of the existing relationships, the ease of doing business, value and price. In these early days of hybrid, there is this willingness to pay a premium to select a different vendor if they have the confidence that the cloud competency is there and that the integration is going to be done and that it will deliver the operational benefits that they're looking for, a lot of which already reside in the cloud services that they're consuming today. So we think, we have Amazon winning the contract with the CIA. It's not directly applicable to hybrid, but shows you for a private cloud environment the type of churn and upheaval that can occur for long-standing vendors in the IT space. So really, we see an early opportunity around hybrid. We touched on some of the messages that we think will best resonate earlier in the presentation, but to get out and start to really mold that mind share. If you're in the IT space today, ensure that your customers know hybrid is something that you're planning on. It's built in. It's going to be delivered in a seamless way. Those are all the things that customers really need to hear at this point to shape their hybrid decisions. As we said, a majority of customers are going to be participating in the large enterprise space in hybridization by the end of 2014. So I think that the time is now the opportunity to shape the mind share in the space it's not too late to do that, because there's going to be a lot more investment that not only drives the hybrid market itself, but can also pull through public cloud, private cloud, additional IT services. Not all of it's going to cloud, first of all. So we see hybrid as one of those important sticking points for vendors, whether you're delivering traditional IT services or cloud services going forward. So that's what's going to shape the market over the next 2 years.
So with that, we've had questions come through. So if anyone has any questions on the presentation that Alan just gave, send them through now. The first question we had was in relation to professional services, Alan, and it said, since you had a separate box for professional services earlier in the slide, do you mean that there are no professional services in the integration budget?
So for the no, so we defined the professional services bucket separately. So that was around the cloud services themselves. We had a second definition for within hybrid. It were the services as well as tools. We did not include the internal effort for customers to make those integrations, but they are two distinct buckets in terms of the budgets.
We had a follow-on question to that, actually. This person wanted to know how we're defining adoption.
So we defined adoption in two different ways. First was a distinct hybrid, so it was self-select. And so, we asked, have you purchased hybrid cloud? And the way that we defined that was two cloud environments, public or private. And you can see that there could be connections within public to public, private to private, or private to public. But that there needed to be integration and centralized management between the two of those. And so that's really the important part of that definition is they're not operating in a silo, they're integrated together. So that's the first way, to self-select for hybrid cloud based on that definition. We also asked for folks that selected that they had adopted both public cloud and private cloud within the same workload, there was a follow-up to say, have you integrated the two services within that workload? And so if they selected yes, then they may not have been labeling it hybrid. Again, we get back to the issues in the naming taxonomies there. So if, in fact, they had integrated that met our definition for hybrid, and so that was the second way in which they were able to qualify for the hybrid cloud adoption.
Any idea about the penetration rates for cloud among the Global 2000? If so, is there any difference in penetration for different kinds of cloud?
So our study, as I said, focused on large enterprise. So within that, if you look at just the Global 2000, we would expect to see increased incidence rates of hybrid cloud adoption as you kind of weed out the smaller part of the large enterprise getting up to those named 2,000 accounts. So we're at about 22% for overall large enterprise. Now, I wouldn't be surprised to see 30 to 50% adoption if you get into that Global 2000.
Alan clears the frog in his throat. I will speak slowly on the next question. We actually had a clarification question when we were talking about geographies. Alan, the question is, have you captured Brazil in Europe?
Brazil in Europe.
I think that's how it's written.
No. So the way that we sampled for the global study, we went out, we did U.S. and Canada for North America. We did UK, Germany, France for Europe. And then we did China, India, and Singapore for Asia Pacific. So we did not survey directly in Brazil.
Next question we had, is the custom integration completely different from third-party integration?
So the custom integration, so the distinction there is a third-party integration can be pre-built, packaged, not necessarily something that's done custom for the client. So that's the distinction that we drew between those things that the customer is doing in-house, those that they're buying from a third party, and those that they're paying to have custom integrated for their own business with that custom integration piece.
Okay. What impact will hybrid have on the public and private cloud markets?
So I think the impact is going to be a change in the way that those solutions are selected, purchased, implemented, and ultimately orchestrated. So there's certainly going to be a financial impact. We think in some ways that the growing hybrid market has held back some levels of adoption as customers have needed to knit together the services on the back end to keep them manageable and efficient from an operating perspective. So we do think it enables some growth as these tools become more prevalent. But it also, I think changes the way that they're being purchased. So we're seeing more, as customers make new cloud purchases, certainly the hybrid is on their mind. How are they going to integrate this, manage it? So as more customers become proficient and have a tool set in place that can deliver the centralized management of hybrid cloud, that makes those additional purchases, it can really speed the time to decision-making and implementation if they're able to have those tools in place and have the confidence that they're going to be able to connect them up and be able to take care of the management part of that purchase.
We have 2 more questions in queue right now. Next question, Alan, is how do you see hybrid being delivered in 2 years and by whom?
So in terms of who's going to be delivering hybrid, certainly continue to believe that the SIs are going to play a large role there. They're building on a lot of those custom integrations. The path forward for both for them and for customers is to package and continue to monetize some of the IP that's been established with those early custom integrations. But overall, we see a lot more hooks, if you will, being built right into the cloud services themselves. So both on the public side, the private side, and the emerging cloud standards, I think, play a role as well to put at least some of the management capabilities right within the solutions, so that it's not something that's added on after the fact. It's really built in and designed for the way that those cloud services are going to be consumed. That may not happen within the next 2 years. I think you're still going to see a robust opportunity for providers outside of the actual cloud services to deliver that integration. But I think over time, that's the evolution that we'll see in terms of who and how these integrations are actually delivered.
Okay. Next question we have is, if hybrid grows, do public and private clouds eventually get blended together?
So in terms of the naming taxonomy, there's been, certainly we've thrown around internally here, in a couple of years, does the word cloud still exist? Is it just the new means for IT consumption and delivery? And I do think that, I think that the distinction between public and private cloud is going to remain very important for, the foreseeable future. Particularly with the regulatory environments, the things like SLAs, pricing, those are all going to continue to maintain the importance of the differences between shared public services and private services that are either owned or delivered exclusively for a single customer. So I don't think that hybrid is really going to change that. I think you'll continue to see distinctions both in terms of the services themselves as well as the, from a vendor standpoint, the pricing elements that go into public versus private cloud services.
Okay. We had one more question come through. How has security, in light of the Snowden incident, impacted the growth of hybrid cloud, if at all?
So I think from a security perspective, certainly that is one of the big benefits that we've seen in talking with customers about cloud, that it's that additional point where they can maintain control, monitor. It just simplifies that whole process, and that not only their operational efficiencies, but being able to have that additional touch point around the security of these actual solutions is one of the big benefits for the hybridization. And I don't think it's materially changed with the Snowden incident. I think that was long enough ago now, and people have been concerned enough with the security around cloud on its own without that type of focus. But certainly that is one of the big drivers. In addition to the efficiency, it's being able to have an additional layer of security for the cloud services that are being consumed. And as you get into adding more complexity, connecting a public cloud to a private cloud, that becomes even more important so to actually make that happen, because there's a lot of, it's not just the management that's holding it back, it's the security to make sure that you know exactly what portions of a workload are being delivered by which resource, to be able to take that step forward and actually do a hybrid environment, get some of the cost benefits, but doing that in a secure, compliant way is always the focal point for customers that we've spoken with about their cloud hybrid adoption.
Okay. We had another question just come through. With regard to ISV integration and pre-built cloud vendor integration, can you name some of the vendors who come up as examples of these modes of integration?
Sure. So for the pre-built, there's fairly robust market. There's a lot of acquisition activity. If you look at companies like Boomi, Cast Iron, being able to deliver that in a prepackaged device. And then if you look at from the vendor side, a lot of the for customers that we've spoken with, the cloud standards, the OpenStack, CloudStack, the vendors that are able to standardize on those platforms is, provides a lot of the common baseline that they need to either do custom integrations or to move forward with some of the prepackaged integrations, largely custom today. But those are, I think, really the most effective ways to, from the ISV perspective, provide the hooks needed to do some of the pre-integration and then enable a hybrid environment for the customers that are consuming those services.
Okay. We don't have any other questions in queue, so with that, it's time to wrap up. So I want to thank you, Alan, for your time in the presentation today, and thanks to everyone who sent through those questions. They were great. Couple quick things I just wanted to share with you guys. Many of you have asked me to send the slides out. I want to let you know that we are sending the slides out by tomorrow. For those of you who have asked me specifically that you need them faster than that, I will be following up with you by the end of the day. When you do get the slides, I want to draw your attention to the cloud coverage that we are doing. So you can take a look through here, and if there's any questions or you'd like to speak to Alan or any of the cloud analysts about this research, please feel free to reach out. So with that, I promised I would share all the social media links with you. So here you can reach out to Alan either through email or follow him as well as TBR on Twitter at the handles listed here, as well as download the content we talked about on SlideShare and watch this presentation and others again on YouTube. And we do encourage you to share these links with folks in your organization if you think that they will get value from these presentations. As you're leaving the presentation, we do have a quick survey, 3 quick questions. How valuable was the content? How good was the presenter? And if there's any other open feedback you'd like to give us, we are taking this feedback in to modify our presentations quarter to quarter, so your feedback is valuable, and we do look forward to engaging with you more. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another minute or 2 in case there's any last-minute questions or requests to talk to Alan. Please send them through now. If not, please be on the lookout for additional cloud webinars we'll be doing over the next several weeks leading into next quarter. We will be sending invitations out for those, but you can also check back with us if you have any additional questions. So thanks again, everyone, for your time, and have a great afternoon.